So, hi everybody. Um, Maybe as we start here, or before we, really get rolling, we just take a minute or two to ground ourselves. Uh, I think, when I listen to Tobin, that tends to happen on its own. Um, I might spend just a moment or two here to take a deep breath together, and whether your eyes are open or closed, either is fine. And connecting with your breath. You might inhale through your nose, and you can either exhale through your nose or through your mouth. You could sigh. And just bringing gentleness to your breath, a softness into your body. So connecting with your breath. And connecting with your body. You might welcome sensation in the tips of your toes. Imagine traveling through the lengths of your legs, softening all your muscles and bones, connective tissues. You could imagine, if you like, a healing energy up through your feet and ankles, calves and shins, your knees, up through your thighs. Imagine softening the marrows of your bones all the way up into your hips and your hip sockets. And from the tips of your fingers, maybe the space all around your fingers and hands, palms of your hands, backs of your hands, and traveling up through the lengths of your arms, softening your elbows and your upper arms, your shoulders, shoulder sockets. And from your root, perineum, your groin, tailbone, and your sacrum, everything's soft without the need to name any sensation or judge any sensation. Just sensation. Softening your pelvis, your lower back, middle back, and upper back, the length of your spine. Solar plexus and your sternum, your ribs, chest, and collarbone, in front and in back. As if you were coating your whole body in this healing balm, generating medicine inside. And softening the back of your neck and your throat. The weight of your head. And all the muscles and bones of your face. Your jaw. And your cheeks. The orbits of your eyes. The centers of your eyes. Your brow, forehead, temples, and your scalp. Imagine softening the space all around your body. And the space within your body. Well beyond the crown of your head. And beneath the soles of your feet. Beyond either side of you, in front of you, behind you. Letting any sense of border or boundary dissolve. Just a sense of transparency. Everything's soft. And just resting here with your body soft, but your awareness crystal clear. As if you could blow away any clouds of distraction, of lethargy, any haze, just dissolving it with your intention. Like you're cleaning off the glass. And finally, imagine blowing on the embers of your heart. You could imagine these glowing embers in your heart center of your chest, could be somewhere in your body or as your body. And without any force, without too much effort, just blowing on these glowing embers. And you could imagine the warmth that it generates. Sharing that warmth with all of us here today. As if we could feel it right through the ether. Breathing naturally. Okay. So even as we transition and talk a little bit, you can try and nurture this sensation, nurture this awareness, this attitude that we've created. We'll explore a little bit about how it relates to waking, sleeping, dreaming, consciousness, experience, society. You know, put all the pieces together. So thank you for that. Again, my name is Nick, and I guess I'm like an old timer now. I finished at West Georgia in 2017. My journey at West Georgia began in 2012, actually late 2011. I was up in Massachusetts, which is where my family's home is, and movement classes full time for my living, and I wanted to write, and I had all these different interests, and in particular had been exploring dreaming and various aspects of what you might call dream yoga for at that point for about a decade, and I just got a message saying that I was freezing up. You all hearing me okay, or is it getting not coming through?
Right now you are. A second ago you just glitched for like 10, 15 seconds.
Uh, well, hopefully it'll keep going.
Yeah,
Is it okay for the moment?
yeah. I've been getting 97% good, but there's a
Okay.
little glitch, and it's slowed down a little bit here and there. And I think the less you move, probably the better too, in terms of. Uh, but yeah,
I'll um, okay. If it gets screwed up again, just send me a chat again through the chat because that seemed to come through pretty quickly.
yeah, great.
So anyway, um, long story short, I had been exploring dreams for about a decade. I'm not sure how many of you were able to read the little bit of writing that I sent over, but it probably gave you a sense of my timeline and some of these remarkable dreams that I had had when I was finishing my undergraduate studies over at Emory. And anyway, a decade went by. I traveled all over the place, was doing, my own explorations, what I thought of as exploring consciousness, though obviously there's a big difference between studying consciousness, as a travel, as a backpacker, basically, and meditator versus studying in academia and learning these different languages of how to understand consciousness. But anyways, late 2011, I got injured and decided I wanted to go back to school. And West Georgia wasn't even on my radar. I hadn't seen or heard anything about it. And and then I had this fateful conversation with a retired psychology professor from California, who said, "Oh, you should look at West Georgia." So I looked at West Georgia. I found some of the professors. I was looking through their bios, and then there was this professor, Tobin Hart, who wrote a book called The Secret Spiritual World of Children. And I thought, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like I didn't know. I read his book. We got on the phone. He was kind enough to speak with me for a while, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And needless to say, knowing that Tobin was there and doing the sort of work that he does was a huge impetus for me to come to West Georgia. And I felt really fortunate to get in and arrived the following fall, 2012. And within about 2 or 3 days, I began to have even more remarkable dreams. So I'd been, looking at my dreams, researching dreams for 10 years or so, and had progressively had these, more and more impactful experiences. But literally within the first week of arriving at West Georgia, they seemed to take it to a whole other level. Um, Not for any reason in particular, none was overt, but although I have some theories about why my dreaming life would have taken off at that time. In any event, within a few weeks, I read an article that Tobin wrote called Deep Empathy. I'm not sure how many of you have read that. It's actually a book chapter in one of the books that he edited. And about an hour after falling asleep from reading that, I fell asleep while I read it. Sorry, Tobin. Um, no, just kidding. So I finished the article, went to bed, and that evening had just this stellar experience, within about an hour of falling asleep, where I felt like an angel had wrapped around me and was doing energy work on my body, mind, on my awareness at that point. And it was just this really powerful lucid dream, or a dream where I knew that I was dreaming and was probably more aware. My consciousness was more peaked than it would typically be when I'm awake. So it was this very special, refined state of being, and also felt in some ways like interact with another entity there, with some kind of autonomous presence. So I didn't have much frame of reference for an experience like that, but that was the beginning of my dissertation. Literally in the first week of being at West Georgia, I knew this is exactly what I want to be looking at while I'm here. So I began to research lucid dreaming, both in a kind of academic sense. I didn't send you the chapter on all the lucid dream science, but basically, lucid dreams were and again, just to clarify, in case some of you, and I can't see your faces, so it's hard to get see exactly how much of this where you are with this. So I'm curious, and of course we'll take some time for everybody to speak. But a lucid dream is a dream where you know that you're in a dream, whereas typically most of us, most of the time, are not aware that we're in a dream. We only know that we have dreamt upon waking up, where we look back and we, oh, okay, I was just dreaming there. We think we're in real time, regardless of whether we're really engaged in the dream in the first person, or sometimes we're watching the dream from a third person perspective. Sometimes we move back and forth. Sometimes we actually embody other characters in the dream. But more often than not, dreams are, at least in my experience, um, they're disembodied. That there is a kind of cognitive deficiency, you might say, because we don't know where we are. We think we're in this place. We think we're in the desert somewhere and we're having a conversation with Barack Obama or something, which is a dream I probably had at some point. And we think that it's real, whereas from an objective perspective, we're actually asleep in our bed and we're just, in this kind of fantasy. So in a lucid dream, you know where you are, you realize you're asleep in your bed, and you also realize to some extent that you are engaged in this fantasy or this illusion. So in a way, it's like hacking consciousness. In a time where normally you would be deficient and in a sense unaware, suddenly you have this extra bit of awareness, and you're also able at that point to have to exercise more volition. You can willfully direct the dream if you want, or in my case, learn not to direct the dream. And we'll be talking a little bit about that as we go. So lucid dreaming is this kind of hybrid state of consciousness, you might say. And in the Western scientific canon, in academia, it's only verified since the early 1980s. So it's kind of remarkable, because we can imagine that people have probably been, and it's been theorized that people have probably been having lucid dreams since we developed our capacity to dream, probably as early human history. So whether that goes back, wherever you want to date that to, a million years, hundreds of thousands of years, but as long as people have been dreaming, there's probably been this capacity to have dreams where you know that you're dreaming. And there have been reports of those kinds of dreams also for a very long time, though maybe, not, obviously the term lucid dreaming wasn't around. And a lot of it was written metaphorically or perhaps symbolically. So for example, Aristotle might have written about having awareness in dreams, or Plato might have mentioned having awareness in dreams. Certain Tibetan Buddhists, and even predating Tibetan Buddhism, in the Bon cultures of Tibet, have written extensively and have a strong oral tradition of dream yoga. So, practices to help cultivate awareness of dreams, and also, how that relates to consciousness more generally. And those traditions have been doing this stuff for at least 3 or 4,000 years, when we, as far as we can ascertain. So 1982 is when the West decided that this thing actually exists, and they found it in a really novel way. A researcher named Stephen LaBerge, who's probably the at least for many years was the face of lucid dreaming in the West, developed an experiment where he was able to signal to researchers who were awake in the lab while he was in the dream. And interestingly enough, there was a concurrent study in the UK by a researcher named Keith Hearn, who and I think his partner Alan Worsley, and they did the exact same experiment at the exact same time, or maybe a year or something earlier. And supposedly there was no corroboration between these two studies, that they didn't even know that they existed, yet they both stumbled upon this, at least that's what they claim, stumbled upon this novel way of testing and validating lucid dreaming in a laboratory. And even after the studies conclusively showed that the dreamer was capable of signaling to the researcher from within the dream, it was still debated for several years until there was enough evidence to kind of turn the tides in the scientific paradigm. For Western psychology in particular, to say, okay, I guess this is real. Whereas prior to that, they just blew it off as phony stuff. So lucid dreaming as a science is very new. We're talking now basically 40 years of science, and during that time, it has kind of ebbed and flowed, at least from my perspective, as far as how much energy has been devoted to actually researching it. It's still on the fringes of academic psychology, I think, very much so. And and dreaming in general is this kind of amorphous study. We know that people dream. Pretty much everyone dreams every time they fall asleep. Probably with rare exception, but we don't know why. So there are different theories as to why we dream, what dreams mean, and this has been the kind of ongoing theme throughout also human history. I think is that there's depending on the culture and the era, there are different opinions as to why what dreams mean. From their spiritual significance to their psychological significance to whether it's a physical correlate. It's just these random workings of our brain. So I'm curious at this point, have any of you, and granted I can't see everybody, but feel free to chime in. Have any of you ever had a dream that was so real to you that it stunned you in some way, or that it stayed with you? Maybe you've had a lucid dream before, a dream where you knew that you were dreaming, or just a dream that changed your life, a dream that you woke up from and you thought that was, so profoundly meaningful. I'm curious that.
I mostly have lucid dreams. I don't dream like every night, or at least don't remember dreams every night. If I take a nap during the day, pretty much every time. At night, I would say like maybe once a week, but I would say I'm lucid in my dreams like 9 out of 10 times. Um, I got like
Wow.
there's a guy that I knew in my undergrad who had night terrors, and they're bad, and he'd gone to some different doctors, and he had some guy that just sort of talked to him about lucid dreaming and about these various practices to do, um, which include just the sort of like during the daytime, during your waking hours, checking with yourself like, am I awake, am I asleep, and then doing various things to check that out. I think you mentioned some of them in your piece, like poking your palm, see if your finger goes to your palm, right? And he just like talked to me about it enough that I just started doing them, and then right on Zoom, it's all up for grabs. But yeah, I started doing that. I want to ask, are you familiar with the movie Waking Life?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's the only like time that I've seen it anywhere really in pop culture at all. So I figured if you weren't familiar, I would have to recommend it.
Lucid dreaming, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
There are a few films, though I think my favorite is probably Inception.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah. But then you're lucid in someone else's dream and they're not lucid, right?
Right. Opens up a
I'm
whole can of
super
worms.
I'm super frustrated that Ben gets to lucid
Oh,
dream
go
all the
ahead.
time. I've already shared this with him. It bothers me that he's doing this and I can't do it. I generally don't ever remember my dreams, and when I do, they're ridiculous, like Winnie the Pooh, and like I'm eating Abraham Lincoln, or like just something like completely that does not feel meaningful. And like generally, I don't remember any dreams at all. I think like once a month I might wake up and have like a vague semblance of some cartoon-like, childlike dream. I don't know. I feel really stunted in this project.
I'm pretty sure eating Abraham Lincoln has some meaning to it. I just want
That's
to
past
acknowledge
life.
that.
You're Lee Harvey. Or no, sorry. I'm sorry. You're uh
Who was that?
John
yeah,
John
Wilkes
John
Wilkes
Booth.
Booth.
Lewis.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Except for there were perfect squares missing from him. Anyway, I don't have any of this lucid dreaming business.
So far,
Abraham Lincoln may be the key.
I want to learn how to do it though. One time, like 20 years ago, by accident, I was swimming underwater in a dream, and I got nervous, and for whatever reason, I did say, like in my head, I was like, "You can breathe," and I breathed, and I could swim. Like that happened one time in my life 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. You know, if you found it once, you're able to find it again. That's my belief. And I think you know, even if you've never had one, it's a capacity that we can all learn to develop. You know, it's a little bit in some ways it's like going to the gym. You know, and capacity is the term that I use to express this. That you know there has to be a kind of raising of that aspect of our body mind, that aspect of consciousness. Sometimes needs to be rehabilitated. But fret not, you know, you can do it. You got time. That's what graduate school is for, especially at West Georgia. Anybody else? And thank you all for sharing.
So, Bob, you go ahead.
Okay. I've I have one really clear one that has stuck to me also for probably like 20 years. Uh, it was beautiful. It was running up a hillside. It was knowing that I was loved. It was everything, that I ever, it was perfect. And I just remember the vivid colors and running up a hill that I knew, but I knew that it looked a whole lot more uh, prettier in my dream. So I was really enjoying it. But that awareness has stuck to me for a couple decades, probably at least.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you can still feel it? You know, I know you remember it, but can you feel it?
In meditation, that I've been trying again to meditate, and yeah, and the feeling is comfort. It's maybe more lack of anxiety than it is. The feeling is relief.
peace.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
So I'll hop in. I hesitate to share about my dream life because it's ridiculously active, and it's also an area of research that I'm extremely interested in. Um, mainly because I have had such an active dream life since I was really, really young. Um, I tend to have more, I think, messages in dreams. That seems to be, when I wake up, I'll have a message that is very relevant to my waking life. So, I mean, I pay attention to my dreams. As far as being lucid in dreams, I had a lot of nightmares when I was really young. And I can remember that moment of awareness that it's a dream. And I used that to wake myself up when I was a young child. Like, okay, I've got to get out of here. I know I'm dreaming. And it's almost like, you're on the inside of your body saying, wake up, wake up, wake up. And that's how I remember it as a kid. More recently, about a year ago, I had a lucid dream that was really very, very relevant to a situation that I was dealing with, a work situation. And it was, I think the meaning that I took from it, almost the act of becoming lucid and realizing this person doesn't have control over me. I'm in control. Like, there was some symbolism there with the lucidity. But at that point, I realized I'm in a dream. Basically, I have control here. I don't know how to explain that, but it had meaning beyond that. But that's really the most, I think that's the most recent lucid dream. I'm not like Ben, like 9 out of 10 dreams are lucid or anything, but.
Yeah, few people are. That's a real gift.
I have a question for you, which is, did you have somebody like tell you like, this is what I was told to do. This is sort of the way you constantly question the nature of your reality, and then you'll, just statistics are the more you're doing it, the more you'll have it, or did you just sort of like have to figure it all out?
Well, in the beginning, they started to happen spontaneously. I began practicing yoga and studying Buddhism around the same time when I was about 21 years old, and I was finishing up college. And I was taking these two classes simultaneously just to satisfy requirements. I hadn't been really interested in either of them, at least not that I was aware of. And I started to have these, really remarkable dreams around the same time. And my interest, it just took off from there. I read, as I was finishing college, and for the few years after college, I got really into Carlos Castaneda. So if you haven't read Carlos Castaneda, he's been in academic circles, he gets berated a little bit, but his books are just, I read them like manuals, as if there was like some really deep teachings there. And I think there probably were, regardless of whether or not, those things really happened to him. And, as I read them, they say there are certain things that you read, and like this this chapter that I read of Tobin, that have a kind of activational effect on you. You read them, and then it just kind of flips a switch or triggers something inside of you. But in my case, it's hard to pinpoint one thing. I wasn't doing reality testing and some of the more conventional practices. I'd say for the first decade or so of my dreaming journey, I was the most important practice by far. And Courtney, I share this with you in particular. If you're interested in really jump-starting your dreaming, was recording dreams. Dream journaling is hands down the most important aspect of this, because it's, you're basically paying attention to that part of ourselves that was otherwise dormant or, being ignored. So the more that you write your dreams down, the more it becomes a part of your life. And like anything else, it just starts to take on more significance. Your brain, it probably changes your brain and your nervous system to accommodate that kind of information, to just, you start taking more awareness into sleep and more awareness as you come out of sleep. And the more and more that you do that, And one of the things that I start to look at in this book is, and I think that is also in line with these ancient dream yoga practices, what the Tibetans were after, what the tantric yogis and other indigenous cultures were after, was this recognition that the dichotomy between waking, sleeping, and dreaming is a very crude dichotomy. It's really a Western dichotomy, in the same sense that the medical model of our understanding of our body and our mind is also a crude dichotomy. This is accurate. It doesn't reflect the way consciousness actually works, which is more of I think that consciousness is really more of a continuity. So if we privilege waking all the time at the expense of dreaming, dreaming atrophies. But if we start to venerate dreaming and put it on par with waking experience, granted we have a little less of it and it's a little more hazy most of the time, but if you can really fuel your dream life, the dichotomy between waking and dreaming starts to break down. And you realize that there are a lot of the things that you reserved for dreaming that seemed only possible in dreaming can actually happen during waking, and vice versa. Things that are happening during waking, they tend to take on more significance in your dreams, and the whole cycle becomes much more continuous. So whether you think of that as an expanded understanding, or a recognition that everything is kind of dreamlike and reality isn't as solid as it might seem, that's a question that's open for debate, and I think is really more about how we language it. But as far as strengthening your dreaming, for me, the practice of recording dreams was and continues to be the most important part. Tobin once made fun of me for this in class. He said, "You're going to have to find a really special partner who can put up with that." And he's right. It's a real. It's, for me, I wouldn't call it an obsession, but I feel like it's just a part of my life at this point. And if I disregard it, it feels like something is off, because I recognize, how valuable that time is. And so that first and foremost can be a huge catalyst. And the more that, again, your dreaming life becomes important to you, the more waking and dreaming merge into a kind of a more, you could say, expanded or deeper understanding of reality and how our body minds work and function within that reality.
Courtney, did you have something you were going to say?
Well, I wanted to ask Nick, on page 17 of this reading that we did, you said, you were talking about lucid dreaming, and you said, "And while the experience of lucid freedom is truly remarkable, and I wish it upon everyone, the project showed me that lucid dreaming is not the goal in and of itself. In fact, it can easily become a hindrance or a trap." And I was hoping you would talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. And thank you again for reading this. And for those of you that are interested in reading more, this is basically my dissertation that I'm now coming into a book. And I welcome everybody's feedback, so I appreciate your going right to it. You're actually some of the first folks to have read it, beyond my dissertation committee and a couple of people that I've shared it with. So lucid dreaming is a trap. I think what that means is that if we focus on trying to cultivate these dreams from what we might call an egoic perspective, just to develop this kind of superpower as a novelty, and we use it just to have lucid dreams, and we haven't spoken much about this, but most people use lucid dreams, and I don't like to generalize too much, but most people in the West that have these lucid dreams, they tend to use that space to exercise control, to play out fantasies, to suddenly you have the keys to the car, you might say, or you have the reins, and you can do just about anything you want with your imagination, and they take advantage of that. So if you were to focus just on these, reifying our egoic desires, it can actually stunt your progress rather than further your psycho-spiritual development, assuming that's what you're after or your understanding of consciousness. I think it's a useful tool. It becomes a medium to explore awareness, which is really what the great spiritual teachers are telling us to do. Is do not, what do they say? And don't pass go, do not collect $200. Like, don't get caught up, don't get snagged along the way, particularly by your achievements. So if we think of lucid dreaming as this great achievement, and that's like the end of the line, that's what we're after, we lose sight of what's really going on, which is the aspect of lucidity itself, right? It's the clarity of being, the clarity of purpose that is really the gift of all this. And lucid dreaming is, in some ways, it can be both a tool to explore that and a kind of road mark or milestone along the way. So, and this comes back to Ben's question. Is it Ben or Benjamin?
I'll go by either, but usually Ben's fine.
Okay. So, this question about, in my case, like, was it about techniques and things like that? How did this develop? And I think that it was a byproduct of exploring consciousness, a byproduct of meditation practice, a byproduct of spending time in nature and letting my mind clear, a byproduct of being embodied. And I'll add that I had that dream where I was told lucid dreaming is a trap. And this came, 3 or 4 years into my dissertation research, where I was basically living and breathing this stuff while at West Georgia. I was doing a lot of those techniques. I had really like ramped it up because I wanted to see how far I could push it, and it started to cause me a lot of stress. It was like I was trying to squeeze water out of a stone, and I think we want to hold it a lot more lightly, because again, it's this what the Buddhists would call pristine awareness that we're after, not so much this kind of feat of consciousness. Does that answer your question, Courtney?
Yeah, very, very much so. But what do you think made you like the drive when you say you were kind of like obsessed with it, which I get, because we get passionate and excited about topics and we want to know them. But it seems like you're saying that you became really hyper vigilant about recording your dreams and testing your reality in this effort to be able to lucid dream kind of on call, or like what's the end goal like for you at the time? Like, you may have come correct and realized like no, I don't need to see this like as an adventure or an alternate, like, I need to see this as an opportunity to witness. I get that. But like, it seems to me what you're saying is you started out with one motivation and then realized like, no, that motivation is kind of hindrance, is getting in my way. That's not the goal. I need to change trajectory. I just wonder, like, what was your initial motivation? Like, what was it you wanted to find in your dreams? Like, that pushed you to kind of want, it's almost like another life in your dreams,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and this is in some ways in retrospect, I don't know that I would have framed it this way initially, but what was really fascinating to me, particularly following that dream I had with the angel wrapping around me, was one, the possibility of communication within dreams. Whether it's possible to dream with other autonomous beings, right? To dream with other consciousnesses out there. But again, in retrospect, it was, why was that dream more meaningful than other dreams? What was it about that? And that's why I asked this question for all of you about your meaningful experiences. What makes something meaningful versus kind of mundane? And the conclusion that I came to was that it was about embodiment. It was about the embodied presence in the dream and the visceral action that the dream elicits that gives it that much more meaning, that moves beyond the symbolic in some ways. As if we're just trying to figure out, what the dream means and interpret it at a symbolic level, it's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes, I think, as Elizabeth pointed out, the dreams are very clear in terms of what messages come through. And other times they're chaotic and random, and you really don't know what they mean, and you can try and figure it out all day, but it's like, decoding them. But then there are these dreams that are very visceral and kinesthetic, and leave what Merleau-Ponty called an echo in the body, that they leave this kind of this imprint on you, resonance, and you wake up feeling that resonance. You feel that inspiration. You feel that renewed sense of purpose. Sometimes you feel cleansed, like anxiety, or as Robert put it, there's this feeling like anxiety is gone. So about 2 years or so, or somewhere into my work on this stuff, I had this dream of freedom, this dream where I felt completely empty, or as if all of that stress and anxiety and what the Buddhists would call suffering had just vanished, dissolved, lifted. And at that point, I also recognized that it too was embodied, just in a different way. Rather than a feeling of denseness in the body, and even an ecstatic feeling is in a way a kind of dense feeling compared to a feeling of emptiness and flow. Does that make sense? That you can have a kind of orgasmic experience in your body, or a really painful experience, and there's like a denseness to those experiences. You feel yourself as a body. Whereas in this later dream that came, this emptiness or openness, I didn't even feel as if I had or was a body. There was just a kind of nothingness. And at the same time, there was a feeling of everythingness. And it's hard to pinpoint it hard any more accurately than that. It's tough to express this feeling, but a kind of oneness. And in the moment of oneness, you don't feel that you have a body. There's no objectifying of the body. You just are a body embedded in the world. At least that's how the experience goes. So in my case, I'd had a taste of this, and trying to ramp up my lucid dreaming practice by, getting hypervigilant was a way to get back into the lab as much as possible. Because as soon as I'd had a taste, I wanted to know why this was happening, how it was happening. Was there a way that I could catalyze it? What were the dynamics behind it? And it seemed like every time I had another experience, I learned something new about it, including, it wasn't just a kind of linear growth, that after that experience of freedom, there was one that was even greater and even more profound. Sometimes there would be dreams that were not as impactful, still lucid, but maybe, more dense, or it seemed like almost taking a step back. So I figured the more experience I had, the more I'd be able to understand it. And it was along the way that I recognized it was the freedom, this embodied experience of freedom and openness, that took precedent over the dreams themselves. And that experience of freedom and openness was not limited to lucid dreams, even though they had served as a kind of a medium through which to explore it initially.
Hey, I too was big on Castaneda, especially when I came here. It was like a manual, but my experience of this class, I think of Carlos a lot. As far as like me and nature, luminous being, death as an advisor, the separate reality stuff, and I think. Anyway, it comes up a lot in my mind when going through this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some pretty remarkable stories in those books, and a lot to take away from them, I think.
Yeah. I actually, thinking of Carlos, and I ran through woods with my eyes closed. And well, it was a good start, but I just trusted the experience. I don't know. It's weird. It was stupid when I think about it, but uh, I love the connectedness that I felt uh, using Carlos as a manual, and just how much more there is to everything.
Hmm.
And that's when I first started at West Georgia too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting about Castaneda's books, as the deeper you into them, is you start to lose track of whether he's in a dream or in some kind of what they call the second attention, and so that line gets blurry. And that was one thing that I was really interested in. But I think to kind of now take this to the next, the evolution of these ideas for me was okay. I started to have these dreams, and I used the dreams as an opportunity to understand how the mechanics of those dreams, which was in some ways the very closely related to the original project of phenomenology, Husserlian phenomenology, Heideggerian phenomenology, using consciousness to understand consciousness. The question that I have now that I'm really sitting with actively, and uh, is, and in particular, it's no coincidence that we're doing this meeting today, as opposed to, or in anticipation of tomorrow and the elections and all that. But what's the point of this? And I think this kind of goes back to maybe what Courtney was sort of touching on, right? Like, okay, so you can have these dreams, and you can explore consciousness. Like, that's cool. That's nice for psychology. Whether you're going to be an academic psychologist and you're trying to be like Husserl and or William James and like really understand the mind and the body mind connection and all that, that's all well and good. But again, the question that comes up for me increasingly is, well, how does this relate now to our waking lives, and how do we bring this into the world? um, my interests, not to go too far off topic, but I see them as related topics, because for me it's this is like an integrative journey. I'm trying to understand how and why all these things fit together. My interests are moving almost, I wouldn't say exclusively, but very much so toward the environment, pedagogy, teaching for one, but recognizing that the state of our world and the direction that we're heading in, what the future generations of this planet are in for, and not to bring like too much doom and gloom into the conversation, but okay, I spent 5 years like doing the most intense research of my life, devoting it to this exploration of consciousness and dreaming, and which I think has tremendously broad implications in the right context. Like, it could be useful for everyone, but how is it useful for everyone? What's the point of this? And I share that because regardless of your interests, I encourage you to think about how these things mesh with the world and with the responsibilities that we increasingly have as particularly as educated people, but just as people in general, and with with life and with the younger people. How do you take what you're doing, niche or very mainstream, and bring it into the world such that it actually helps us as a society, as a species? Because I think the time for pet projects is kind of over, unfortunately. So I don't mean to say that to put too much pressure on you, but it's something that, having now moved from West Georgia for a few years and working in the world and working as an educator, and as an independent educator for the most part, I have a few ties to academia, but mostly I'm outside of academia. what do you do? You know, how do we take the thing that we're passionate about and bring it to the world? So I welcome your feedback, you know, whether it's about this idea of dreaming and your own experiences with dreams, or whatever it is you're working on. And yeah, and that's whether you feel that sense of responsibility or not.
Before you have people talk about that, I just have a question for you about dreaming that came up while I was reading this, which is, what do you think about the possibility of non-human animals lucid dreaming? And I ask this in the context of lions who sleep like 20 hours a day when they're adults, because I figure for them, when they wake up and they come to this world, it's got to be less like real to them than their dream world because they're there so much more of the time.
Didn't you say in the book
Yeah.
that you don't think animals lucid dream? I thought I read somewhere in there that you stated like humans are the only animals that lucid dream, because I underlined it and was like, how do we know this?
If I did say that, please show me where, because I didn't intend to say that. I don't think I wrote that, but
Yeah, you were dreaming, Courtney.
so this is just my take on this. You know, obviously I can't say for sure, but lucid dreaming is a metacognitive activity. So
That's fair.
there's, you know, aware of your own awareness, right? There's mindfulness, and it reminds me of your question a lot of the pre-trans fallacy. Are you all familiar with that idea yet? Well, if not, right, you can go look that one up, and it's an important concept. And the idea is that, you know, in the case of a lion, as far as we know, the lion may have, like you say, this kind of, you know, this really rich dreaming life. And I know I listen to even my little dog, you know, he's woofing all night long. He's clearly doing something while he's asleep. And you know, and the waking life may be less impressive, but the lion probably doesn't have the metacognitive awareness to be able to look at its own experience objectively and say, oh, that was a dream, or now I'm awake. There's just this kind of continuous presence, right? Without awareness of what it even is. So that's the basis, metacognition. I probably would limit the capacity to lucid dream, at least in the way that we're looking at it, to uh, dolphins, whales, you know, assuming they also have those kinds of cognitive abilities. So it's at this point, it's probably pretty limited. It doesn't mean that you know, you can't really have awareness that you're dreaming if you don't know what dreaming is relative to waking.
Yeah, that it's predicated. The question's predicated on the notion of a separate self.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Tobin.
No, go ahead.
So the pre-trans fallacy is this idea that, you know, in simple terms, that as a baby, there is no sense of separation, right? And this, you can even look at this in terms of trends throughout human history, that this kind of movement towards, you know, more, well, metacognitive awareness. But anyway, that you have this baby who has a sense of oneness and interconnectedness, but it doesn't know that it's a person. You know, it doesn't have a sense of self. So then as the baby grows up and becomes a child and adolescent and whatever, there is this separation from the mother, you might say, from that sense of oneness, where we develop our identity. But in that identity, the baby begins to suffer. It feels separate. So the movement to trans, or transpersonal in this case, would be the movement to the recognition that we are separate, and then finding our way back to that oneness, at which point the experience is that much richer. So the oneness of the baby is substantively, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Substantially, it's just different from the experience of the you know, someone older who is able to find their way into that transpersonal experience. Does that make sense? Did I do okay with that, Tobe?
As far as I'm concerned, yeah.
All right.
but it is Ben's question was predicated right on the notion of a separate self. So a lion might be lucid. All of it, there may not be any difference, right, between that. Yeah. Courtney, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just saying that might be then what you were getting at what made me ask that about how do we know is on page 14. It said it was about freedom. When you were talking about freedom, you were saying, I wanted to get at the heart of this matter by examining what makes lucid freedom a uniquely human experience. And that's when I was getting like, well, wait. So I think it's that lucid freedom that you're talking about, not just lucid dreaming. Like, I get it now.
Hmm. Well, it's a good point. Like I don't know, I can't say definitively that it's exclusive to humans, but it's, at least as far as we can tell, what we're talking about here is in some ways, such a complex, act of cognition that it'd be hard to imagine other creatures cultivating that sort of consciousness, though not impossible. And at least, it's not to say that dolphins, whales, that other animals that we think of as having highly developed consciousness wouldn't be able to do it. But as far as being able to do it and express it, uh, it's a kind of fine line. But I think we're the only creatures on the planet that can actually, you know, express this sort of thing, that it's even a possibility at this point. But yeah, I can't say. We have to go back and revise that. How are we doing on time, Tobin? You're on mute.
Still on mute. Okay. We're probably maybe we're good for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we probably should pause. So yeah, I was there. There were a couple things, Nick. Other folks have things to say, maybe for sure. I just wanted to highlight a couple things that I really interesting to me in terms of consciousness. 23 to 24. Tarthang Tulku, when we begin to feel free ourselves from the need to react so as to investigate an awareness that is not bound to the agent. In a very sort of down to earth, everyday sense, this need to react seems to me to be a really great trailhead in waking consciousness, to sort of overcome whatever habitual tendencies, enculturation, socialization, this kind of thing, right? Our reaction to stuff, as opposed to a response, which is of a different order. It's a conscious, it's a freedom rather than that. And so rather than just in dream time, that to me really spoke to, that continuity and that consistency of goal that you've been talking about, right? Lucidity in dream or wake, and so that, I don't know, that just seemed like a really simple, nice trailhead of watching during waking consciousness too. I'm ready to react to this. Oh, they just did it. I just reacted. Oh, my body just reacted. And it's like, as you talk about later on, that notion of equanimity and sort of open gaze, and even as you've talked through the whole thing and led us through the meditation about softening the body, right, and softening the mind, and that and that the body is psychological, and the psychological is psyche is body as well. So that just that sort of presence, I think that you've mentioned several times, is anyway. That's one thing that stood out to me as a thread through.
Yeah, I think that's apart from, and maybe that's really the answer of how this becomes applicable to the world, What I found through the dreaming process was that the way to cultivate these states of being, and again, not that that was the goal, but what seemed to be the catalyst for the more remarkable dreams was this ability to be non-reactive, to to not let our habits of reactivity dictate the flow of the dream, and by extension dictate the flow of our lives, the way that we move through life. And if we reflect on that for a moment, think about our lives and our day to day, how many things we do are reactive, where it's like we're on the hamster wheel. Life is throwing things at us, and we're just doing this, like hitting ping pong balls back. Everything from conversation, communicating with people, to the decisions that we make, the choices that we make in our lives. And what really, what the dream showed me, and I think what it shows us, is when you can find a stillness there, and witness, but not just in the mind, witness in an embodied way, the experience as if it were happening through us. That tends to be what motivates the more healing, you might call it, or meaningful experiences of the dream. And you can just look at our world and think, okay, if we weren't reacting out of habitual behavior all the time, which is basically, you could drill that down to like the way our nervous system works, and that we're receiving stimulus from all different things, and if we're really revved up and tense all the time, we're going to react in a certain kind of way, in a way that's usually patterned. Whereas here is this opportunity to explore those patterns, deconstruct them, and find that place of equanimity that it's sort of like ground zero of who we are. At that point, there isn't even an identity. There's just a presence engaging with the world, and it's like you have this blank slate, and from that you can create yourself any way you want to be.
Yeah, it's a nice description. Well, just carrying that thread on too, on 29, you talk about striking a balance between control and surrender, both in lucid dream, but the implication is, outside all the time, right? And then on 33, it's an interesting idea of, you mentioned leaning into, and that is leaning into the experience without, whether it's dream or wake, without analyzing, without labeling, without critical reflection, which of course is in many ways the antithesis of what we're supposed to do in graduate school, right? So, but it is that non-reactive. Is there a way to sort of, I wonder if you'd have something to say about that balance between control and surrender, and that balance between sort of leaning into open-endedly, without leaping instantly to that, that critical reflection.
Mm-hmm. I think the idea is that we're not trying to control the dream, or in by extension, to control our experiences, to manipulate our environment so much, as much as the effort is to control ourselves, to hold ourselves in place, or to put it another way, to be present requires an aspect of self-control. We have to not not let ourselves stray from that control. And that's really the definition of mindfulness. It's that there's a kind of coming back to a sense of centeredness, so that we don't behave erratically, you might say. And it's an embodied process. I think this is where the terminology in psychology and in the way that we think about mindfulness and meditation and being present is, the way that it's talked about is usually as a mental activity. And what I'm proposing is that it's not so much just your mind's ability to be still, but an embodied to be still, which is why we started with that initial practice. That the more you learn to soften your body and still your body and keep your mind clear and non-reactive, the more we temper our nervous system. And the more we can bring our nervous system down to this place of almost neutral or equanimity, if you prefer, where we're not reactive, we're not operating out of tension or kind of predisposition of fight or flight response, we are able to really see objectively the things that do cause those responses, the parts of ourselves that are still holding tension, that are still driving our erratic behavior, the parts of us that cause that reactivity. So you can explore those things while you're awake, and you can explore them in dreams. And they're basically wounds. This is where I think psychotherapy, really overlaps nicely with a lot of what we've been talking about here, and that is we start to discover that we have these patterns, or that the patterns are being driven by tensions that we're holding in our body, and we have to control ourselves just enough so as to stay present with those tensions, those areas of tension, those wounds that we might be holding, and learn to accept them, learn to be with them rather than shove them back down into our unconscious, rather than cope and just sort of stuff them away and go about our regular way of being. So it takes a certain amount of self-control to be able to surrender control more and more. And that's the idea of leaning in, that you're holding yourself in this with those wounds, with those patterns, so as to help them release. It's paradoxical, this idea of surrendering ourselves. Really what we're surrendering is our need to react, or surrendering that reactivity and the trace of will, right? That's how Heidegger put it, that there's this trace of will, this ability to stay just enough, to have just enough control to hold yourself there so that you can experience what's already present, as opposed to just avoiding it.
I really like on page 40, you say our sense of self as viewing our sense of self as an ever evolving process. That's great. I haven't thought of it that way, but because I've spent so many years in search of self, and it's much easier to think about it as ever evolving.
Yeah, I think that ultimately you can feel yourself as that process. And that's really where the magic is. When you recognize that what we think of as a self, or as an identity, is still a kind of wound in a way. It's still something that's holding on to a sense of surety. And according to Buddhism, and I'm not a Buddhist per se, but according to that tradition, it's that sense of surety that we are an independent person that causes our suffering, that keeps us in a sense of separation. Whereas the goal would be to to move beyond that into a kind of flow.
I appreciated Laughlin's mention of Laughlin's on 49 and thereabouts polyphasic culture, and how much we've in a what he termed a monophasic culture, that emphasis on rational sensory sort of experience, that the possibility of anything else as being true or valid is really interesting. And Thoreau on 55, our truest life is when we are in dreams awake. Fascinating, huh? I didn't know that of him.
I think our the Western paradigm is just continually reinforcing division, and it's no more clear than tomorrow when everybody goes to the polls. It's just all about this independence and in many ways competition between things. This is weighing everything against everything else in order to understand it. Just this kind of multiplicity of binaries, more and more binaries between things. And in a lot of ways, that's I think that causes us a lot of strife.
It has for the last few years, hasn't it? So especially. Oh. Just in our last couple minutes here, what else, folks, would you want to jump in with anything?
I really appreciate what you said about bringing research sort of to the world. It's something that I've thought about a lot. I did undergrad research in political science and philosophy, and then got a master's in philosophy. And there was some point during that program that I just started having this sensation of like, I'm taking all of these classes about like ethics and social justice, and especially like my master's was in Georgia State. So I'm literally like walking through downtown Atlanta on my way to class and just seeing like what's going on in the city, and just like, man, I don't know that me sitting in this classroom is doing anything productive. Like, I feel good learning, right? And it's probably good for me to learn these things, but I do think it's a really valuable thing for academics to ask themselves, like, how can you do that? Like, like, if you got to publish stuff in journals because there's that part of the culture, like, that's fine, but make sure that you are taking what you're learning and sort of applying it elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think depending on whether you want to look at it in a macro perspective, or a micro perspective. By micro, just our lifetime, or macro, like, the next few hundred years. What sort of mark, maybe not mark, do we want to leave on the world, but like how are we going to contribute something valuable with a recognition? Our time here is increasingly finite, whether it's in our own lifetime or our species on this planet. It's, we have to understand that, like, the American dream, quote unquote, that you can just do whatever you want, and like, life is this fun adventure, is in some ways what's gotten us into this mess. And that there are great challenges that lie ahead of us, like very real challenges that most of the world has already been dealing with for a very long time. And it's coming back around. So we can't take for granted the opportunities that we have to both uh, help future generations, help our species, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. Like, there's, well, it would be easy in some ways and convenient to just like become a professor, and maybe not so easy. I don't want to take that for granted, but you just sort of like live out the life of the academic and go through the motions, right? Set yourself up and get a nice house and like have a nice fun life. That's not going to cut it anymore. At least that's the way I feel, that we're being called to action. And it's if we don't wake up to that now, sooner or later, it's gonna smack us upside the head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't take offense to that. Thanks, Courtney, for putting that out. He wasn't talking about me, but the. But it's also there are like two, I think, of two different sort of layers of that dilemma that Ben raises and that you raised, Nick, and that is on the one hand, social activism and really doing it in the world and so forth, and uh, in a way, and versus interiority, in interior consciousness. I mean, this is really the foundation of the whole program, right? On the one hand, how does your consciousness change your presence in the world and therefore propagate out in a way that's remarkably powerful? So that's one direction, right? We can see this in Trump right now, how that particular consciousness propagates and then activates in the world in a remarkable way. If this was a person with a different consciousness, it would propagate and activate something different. So without doing anything explicit or direct to society, that interiority really impacts. On the other hand, what do you do in terms of more explicit social activism? So that's one. You talk about binaries. That's one interesting sort of question. The other, in sort of grad school or whatever way, is that input output sort of question, that sort of absorption versus creativity, that doing versus sort of swallowing. So learning this kind of thing, and that's a real interesting tension too. That somehow is a little bit parallel to this to me. But I know at some point, especially in grad school and other times, it's like, okay, enough already. I gotta do something. I gotta write something. I gotta create something or build something or rake the leaves or whatever it is, right? So there's that incredible kind of, I'm looking at leaves out my neighbor's raking, um, but there's that dynamic too. And and even in the middle of each of those continua or binaries, I wonder how much that's akin to what you were describing earlier in terms of that will and surrender. We're in the trying to work in that interstitial space between these things. And anyway, and some people are, big time social activists, and some people are big time sort of interior sort of quiet activists, let's say, and some of that's just choice and personality and so forth. But I think, as you both have said, that this is a time when sitting on the sidelines is past in some ways, right? Really, it's like, no, but how that gets taken up is a very, very personalized, I think, kind of question, right? So
I think he had Thoreau, the quote that you brought up, Thoreau, civil disobedience is a really interesting piece because he's got, that's not sort of his focus. If you have like Walden, it's all about this internal,
yeah,
I'm gonna even get away from society so I don't have to worry about any of that. And then he says, I don't want to pay taxes to a government that's sending people to war, right? Like, okay.
yeah,
I think that, and I really appreciate what you said, Tobin. And for me, this project ultimately has been about authenticity, and that word gets thrown around a lot, but I think that's really what I'm after, in terms of why I practice theology. The idea that we can deconstruct who we think we are, or all of the patterns and habits that have been uh, conditioned, that have been fed to us, so that we can get to the heart of who we really are, and what we're really here to do, and whether or not that's some kind of divine purpose, or there's the purpose arises still at a level of identity. As long as it is, we get to that heart of it, that thing that gets us out of the bed, it gets us out of bed in the morning and gives us meaning. And this reminds me of Viktor Frankl's work. As long as we find that kernel that really makes us go, that's activism, right? But it may not be that you're on the streets, revving everybody up, or you might just be sitting in a monastery holding that stillness, or, for the most part, I would think a lot of us will be, teachers and sharing these things. So it doesn't look a certain way, but it feels a certain way, I think. And the idea would be to align your deepest sense of self with your sense of purpose, and then what you do in the world, how you bring that into the world. And when it lines up in that way, you can really feel it. It's not just metaphor, but it feels very much like you become a channel for that purpose, for that inspiration to move through into the world. And as long as we're all doing that, I think everything's going to be okay.
That's a nice way to say it, Nick. It's, yeah. When doing and being really come together, and doing comes out of being in a way. Yeah, yeah. Great. Well, we're at our bewitching hour, or thereabouts, and we better give ourselves a 2 minutes anyway to follow up. But any last words on any side whatsoever? Well, Nick, thanks so much for joining up with us, and we really appreciate it, and appreciate your writing, and appreciate what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I'll follow up with you maybe in the morning or something. I'm tied up for the rest of the afternoon, but maybe we can touch base tomorrow. But maybe we can unmute and say thanks and goodbye. But you get the last word, though, Nick.
Oh, well, before you say that, I put my website link, or one of the websites, in the chat, so you can reach me through there. I will, if anybody's interested in reading more, I could use the feedback. So you can, please don't hesitate to reach out, and any questions you might have, anything like that. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today, and and try to consolidate a lot of this into a shorter period of time. But I really, I'm just grateful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I
with that.
Thanks,
Thank you
Nick.
for being here.
It's my pleasure, and good luck, everybody. Slow and steady wins the race.
Great. Thanks, Nick. We'll let you sign off, and guys, we'll just take 2 minutes here to finish up. So thanks again.
All right.
Much love.
Take care, everybody. Much love to you too. Tobin he's it's a good person. You all are in good hands.
Yeah, I paid him to say that.